The warp screamed as reality tore open above the hive world of Metallica Tertius. But this wasn't the familiar crimson wound that heralded daemon incursions or the sickening green gash of an orc invasion. This rift pulsed with something darker, older, more primal than the chaos gods themselves. Blood-red lightning crackled across the void, and from within that dimensional tear, something ancient stirred. What emerged wasn't bound by the laws that govern this grim universe. No psychic signature registered on Imperial augurs. No warp disturbance triggered the automated warning systems that had protected humanity for 10 millennia. Instead, a figure materialized in the upper atmosphere, his impossibly long coat billowing in the thin air as he descended toward the sprawling industrial complex below. Alucard had awakened in a realm far stranger than any nightmare his immortal mind had conjured during centuries of slumber. The scent of blood hung heavy in the recycled air of this world, but it was different. Tainted, mixed with the acrid stench of Prometheum exhaust and the metallic tang of endless war. His crimson eyes swept across the Gothic spires and manufactorums that stretched beyond the horizon, taking in the sheer scale of human civilization in the 41st millennium. But something was wrong, something beyond even the obvious decay and militaristic oppression that marked every surface of this industrial hellscape. The very air thrummed with psychic energy, and in the distance, shadows moved that shouldn't exist. This wasn't just a world at war. This was a reality where war had become the fundamental law of existence. Deep within the planetary governor's palace, Inquisitor Vex Mordian felt the disturbance ripple through the immaterium. His psychic hood crackled with warning runes as something unprecedented registered on his consciousness. Not chaos, not xenos, something else entirely. Something that made his enhanced senses recoil in instinctive terror. The aged Inquisitor rose from his meditation throne, servo skulls orbiting his power-armored form as he accessed the planetary defense network. Orbital sensor arrays showed nothing. Atmospheric monitors detected no foreign craft. Yet every fiber of his being screamed that something had arrived. Something that threatened the careful theological balance he had spent decades maintaining on this forge world. In the Underhive, gang wars paused as feral children looked skyward through the rusted grating that separated their world from the one above. They felt it too, though they lacked the words to describe the presence that had descended upon their world. Ancient predator instincts, honed by generations of survival in the toxic depths, whispered warnings their rational minds couldn't process. Alucard landed silently in the central plaza of Hive Primus, his boots touching down on consecrated marble without disturbing the dust that had accumulated over centuries of industrial decline. Around him, servitors continued their programmed routines, their lobotomized minds incapable of recognizing the anomaly in their midst. But the few fully human workers nearby felt their blood run cold as an inexplicable dread settled over the area. He studied the architecture with growing fascination. Gothic spires reached toward a sky choked with industrial smog, their surfaces carved with skulls and aquillas that spoke of a civilization obsessed with death and devotion. Prayer scrolls fluttered from iron chains, their high Gothic text proclaiming mankind's eternal struggle against darkness. Yet Alucard sensed that this darkness wasn't metaphorical. It was real, tangible, pressing against the barriers of reality with malevolent intent. The no-life king had walked through London's fog-shrouded streets when Jack the Ripper stalked his victims. He had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth of technologies that would reshape the world. But this place existed on a scale that dwarfed even his considerable experience. This wasn't just a world. It was a monument to humanity's refusal to surrender, built from the bones of countless dead and maintained by the sacrifice of billions more. A patrol of Adeptus Arbites rounded the corner, their carapace armor gleaming under the artificial lumens that provided the plaza's only illumination. Their leader, a grizzled sergeant whose face bore the ritual scarification of his order, immediately noticed the figure standing motionless in the center of the square. His hand moved instinctively to his shock maul as training kicked in. Something about the stranger triggered every threat assessment protocol the sergeant had learned during his decades of service. The figure was too tall, too still, and there was something fundamentally wrong about the way shadows seemed to gather around him despite the overhead lighting. When the stranger turned to face them, the sergeant felt his blood freeze in his veins. Those eyes, ancient beyond measure, holding depths of experience that made the sergeant's own battle-hardened psyche feel like that of a child. They weren't human eyes, despite the humanoid form that contained them. They belonged to something that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, that had walked through oceans of blood and emerged thirsting for more. The sergeant's vox crackled to life as he attempted to report the contact, but the words died in his throat. How could he describe what he was seeing? How could he explain that every instinct screamed danger, yet the figure made no threatening moves? Instead, the stranger seemed almost amused by their presence, as if their weapons and authority were quaint relics from a more innocent age. Alucard spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the plaza, despite its conversational tone. The words were in perfect High Gothic, though he had never heard the language before this moment. Somehow, the psychic resonance of this reality had granted him understanding of its linguistic patterns, just as it had revealed glimpses of its history. "Welcome, committee. How refreshing. Though I must say, your uniforms lack a certain elegance compared to what I'm accustomed to." The Arbites patrol exchanged uncertain glances. The stranger's casual dismissal of their authority was either the act of a madman or something far more dangerous. In the Imperium, such disrespect typically resulted in immediate summary execution. Yet something about this figure suggested that conventional responses might prove inadequate. The sergeant stepped forward, his shock maul crackling with electrical energy. "By the authority of the Adeptus Arbites, identify yourself and state your purpose on Metallica Tertius. Failure to comply will result in immediate detention and interrogation." Alucard's lips curved in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp for comfort. His gaze swept over the assembled lawmen with the casual interest of a predator evaluating potential prey. When he spoke again, there was something in his tone that made the sergeant's enhanced hearing detect harmonics that shouldn't exist in human speech. "My purpose? How delightfully direct. I find myself in unfamiliar surroundings, officer. Perhaps you could enlighten me about this charming world of yours. The constant warfare, the industrial decay, the delicious aroma of fear that permeates every breath. It's all quite fascinating from an anthropological perspective." The sergeant's training warred with his instincts. Protocol demanded he either arrest the individual for questioning or eliminate him as a potential threat. Yet, something about the stranger's demeanor suggested that neither option would proceed according to standard procedures. The figure radiated an aura of barely contained violence that made even his hardened subordinates shift nervously in their positions. "Unknown contact. You are in violation of Imperial law. Submit to custody immediately or face the consequences." "The consequence?" Alucard's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. How wonderfully ominous. "Tell me, Sergeant, in your experience, what typically constitutes consequences in this particular corner of reality?" Before the sergeant could respond, the plaza's atmospheric processors suddenly cycled down, plunging the area into the crimson half-light of emergency illumination. The change wasn't gradual or mechanical. It happened instantly, as if something had reached out and extinguished the artificial suns that lit this world. In that moment of transition, every human present felt their most primitive fears awaken. In the bloody illumination, Alucard's form seemed to shift and waver. His outline became less distinct, shadows pooling around him like living things eager to serve their master. The temperature dropped noticeably, breath beginning to mist in air that had been warm moments before. When he moved, it wasn't with the smooth gait of a human, but with the fluid precision of something that had forgotten the limitations of mortal flesh centuries ago. The Arbites opened fire without waiting for orders. Las rounds and stub-gun bullets filled the air where the stranger had been standing, their muzzle flashes strobing against the Gothic architecture like lightning during a storm. But their target was no longer there. He had simply stepped aside, moving between the shots with casual elegance, as if their weapons were firing in slow motion. When the echoes of gunfire faded, Alucard stood exactly where he had been before, completely unharmed. His coat hadn't even been disturbed by the barrage. He regarded the smoking weapons with the mild interest of someone observing a particularly clever trick performed by trained animals. Fascinating. Energy weapons alongside projectile firearms. Your technology seems caught between eras, much like your society appears suspended between reason and fanaticism. Though I must say, your accuracy leaves something to be desired. The sergeant's hand moved to his vox again, this time successfully establishing contact with the precinct fortress. His voice was steady, despite the supernatural dread that had settled over the plaza like a suffocating blanket. Control, this is Patrol 77. We have encountered an unknown entity exhibiting anomalous capabilities, requesting immediate backup and possible inquisitorial intervention. The contact appears to be immune to conventional weapons and demonstrates reality-altering abilities. The response came immediately, crackling through the vox with the authority of higher command. Patrol 77, maintain visual contact with the anomaly. Inquisitor Mordian has been notified and is en route with a full response team. Do not engage further unless directly threatened. Alucard tilted his head, his enhanced hearing easily intercepting the radio communication. His smile widened, revealing more of those unsettling teeth. An Inquisitor? How theatrical. I do appreciate proper ceremony when meeting new acquaintances. The vampire lord began to walk, not toward the Arbites patrol, but in a slow circle around the plaza's perimeter. His movements were hypnotically smooth, and several of the younger officers found their eyes tracking his progress despite their training. There was something predatory about his gait, like a wolf testing the boundaries of a sheep pen. Tell me, gentlemen, what makes an individual worthy of this Inquisitor's personal attention? I confess myself curious about the hierarchy of threats in your particular corner of existence. The sergeant's jaw tightened as he weighed his response. In his 23 years of service to the Adeptus Arbites, he had faced rogue psykers, cult uprisings, and even a minor daemon incursion during the Feast of Malediction. But this entity defied every category in the Imperial threat assessment protocols. It spoke with casual sophistication while radiating an aura of violence that made his survival instincts scream warnings. Inquisitor Mordian deals with threats to the Emperor's domain that exceed local authority. Heretics, mutants, xenos, infiltrators, and worse. The sergeant paused, studying Alucard's reaction. Based on your demonstrated abilities, I'd say you qualify for his attention. How flattering. Alucard's voice carried genuine amusement. Though I suspect your Emperor and I might have different perspectives on what constitutes a threat. In my experience, the most dangerous individuals are often those who believe themselves righteous guardians of order. The vampire lord's casual blasphemy sent ripples of shock through the assembled lawmen. In the Imperium, such words were tantamount to signing one's own death warrant. Yet the speaker delivered them with the same tone one might use to comment on the weather. Several officers began muttering prayers under their breath, their hands moving to sacred Aquila pendants worn beneath their armor. High above the plaza, servo skulls emerged from hidden alcoves in the Gothic architecture. Their mechanical eyes focused on the anomalous figure with the cold precision of Imperial surveillance technology. Data streams flowed back to command centers throughout the hive, where cogitators processed the information with increasing alarm. The entity registered on visual spectra but generated no heat signature, no electromagnetic field, no biological readings that made sense according to established parameters. In the depths of the Adeptus Mechanicus shrine forge that formed the planet's industrial heart, Tech Dominus Varec 7 observed the incoming data with growing fascination. His augmented consciousness interfaced directly with the surveillance network, processing thousands of data points simultaneously. What he saw challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. The entity appeared to exist in a state of controlled violation of physical laws. Its cellular structure, when glimpsed through high-resolution imaging, seemed to shift between states of matter in ways that should have been impossible. Most disturbing of all, the thing cast no reflection in the polished surfaces of the plaza's monuments, despite clearly existing in three-dimensional space. Varec 77's mechanical voice resonated through the shrine forge's vaulted chambers as he addressed his assembled acolytes. Brothers, we witnessed something unprecedented. This entity exists outside the boundaries of both material science and warp phenomena. Its very presence suggests technologies or evolutionary adaptations beyond our current understanding. The Tech Dominus paused, his optical mechadendrites adjusting as he processed additional data streams. Most intriguing of all, the entity appears to be conversing casually with Arbites personnel, displaying linguistic comprehension that suggests either extensive preparation or some form of instantaneous knowledge acquisition. Either possibility warrants immediate investigation. Back in the plaza, Alucard had completed his circuit and now stood facing the patrol once again. The crimson emergency lighting cast his features in sharp relief, emphasizing the aristocratic angles of his face and the predatory gleam in his ancient eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried easily across the open space despite its conversational volume. I find myself curious about your society's relationship with death. These monuments, these architectural choices, the skulls adorning every surface. You've built an entire civilization around the aesthetics of mortality. Yet I sense that death here is not the gentle release it once was in my own experience. The sergeant felt sweat beading beneath his helmet despite the plaza's chill. The stranger's observations cut uncomfortably close to theological truths that most citizens preferred not to examine too closely. In the Imperium, death was indeed rarely gentle or final. The lucky died quickly in service to the Emperor. The unlucky became servitors, cherubs, or worse. Death serves the Emperor in the 41st millennium. It's not for outsiders to judge our ways. Outsider. Alucard savored the word like fine wine. Yes, I suppose I am that, though I wonder if your Emperor would consider me quite the outsider you imagine. After all, we both have extensive experience with the administration of death on an industrial scale. Before the sergeant could formulate a response to this fresh blasphemy, the distinctive whine of grav engines filled the air above the plaza. Imperial Guard Valkyries descended from the smog-choked sky, their searchlights cutting through the crimson gloom like the eyes of mechanical angels. The aircraft circled the plaza in tight formation, their door-mounted heavy bolters trained on the anomalous figure below. Alucard regarded the aerial display with polite interest, tilting his head back to observe the circling aircraft. His pose was relaxed, almost casual, as if armed military vehicles were a common sight in his daily routine. When he lowered his gaze back to the Arbites patrol, his expression held a note of mild disappointment. More conventional responses. How predictable. Though I admit, the aesthetic design of your aircraft shows more imagination than I initially credited your civilization with possessing. The largest Valkyrie settled onto the plaza's landing pad with mechanical precision, its engines cycling down as a ramp descended from its armored bulk. The figure that emerged commanded immediate attention through sheer presence rather than physical stature. Inquisitor Vex Mordian stood barely average height, but the symbols of his office and the aura of absolute authority he projected made him seem larger than the space marines who would have towered over him. The Inquisitor's power armor bore the accumulated honors of decades spent combating threats to Imperial security. Purity seals fluttered from every joint and surface, their sacred scripts warding against corruption in all its myriad forms. His storm bolter hung ready at his hip, while servo skulls orbited his position like mechanical planets around a star of pure will. When Mordian spoke, his voice carried the weight of Imperial law made manifest. By the authority invested in me by the God Emperor of mankind, I command you to identify yourself and submit to examination. Your presence here violates the natural order and threatens the stability of Imperial rule. Alucard's smile widened as he took in the Inquisitor's regalia and bearing. Here, finally, was someone who understood the theater of power. The elaborate costume, the ceremonial weapons, the careful orchestration of authority through symbol and ritual. It reminded him of the Vatican's cardinals during the height of their temporal power, though these imperial servants carried their roles with deadlier seriousness. Inquisitor Mordian, your reputation precedes you, though I confess I only learned of your existence moments ago. Alucard executed a perfect courtly bow, the gesture flowing with centuries of practiced elegance. I am Alucard, sometimes called the No-Life King, though I suspect that particular title may require translation in your cultural context. The Inquisitor's enhanced hearing caught subtle harmonics in the entity's voice that suggested non-human vocal structures. His auspex registered negative readings for all standard life signs, yet the being clearly possessed consciousness and mobility. Most disturbing of all, his psychic senses detected no warp signature whatsoever, as if the creature existed in a null space between material reality and the immaterium. No Life King. The title suggests undeath, yet you display none of the characteristics associated with Imperial necromantic phenomena. Explain your nature and purpose on this world. Alucard straightened from his bow, his movements fluid as liquid shadow. My nature? How refreshingly direct. I am what your language might term a vampire, though I suspect your understanding of that concept has been colored by whatever passes for folklore in this particular reality. As for my purpose, I find myself here quite by accident, drawn through dimensional barriers by means I'm still attempting to understand. The word vampire sent ripples of unease through the assembled Imperial forces. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, such creatures were well documented, typically arising from warp corruption or xenos influence. Yet this entity exhibited none of the expected characteristics. It spoke with intelligence rather than bestial hunger, displayed sophisticated reasoning rather than predatory instinct. Mordian's hand moved to his stormbolter, though he didn't draw the weapon. His decades of experience had taught him to recognize when conventional arms might prove inadequate. This creature radiated a confidence that suggested immunity to standard Imperial responses. Vampire entities are classified as extreme threats under Imperial doctrine. They are to be destroyed immediately upon contact. Yet you display anomalous characteristics that warrant investigation before termination. You will accompany me for examination and interrogation. Will I? Alucard's tone carried polite inquiry rather than defiance. Tell me, Inquisitor, what typically happens to entities who refuse such generous invitations? The response was immediate and uncompromising. Refusal results in immediate purification through controlled orbital bombardment. This plaza and everything within a 5-kilometer radius would be reduced to blessed ash within the hour. Alucard nodded thoughtfully, as if the threat of orbital annihilation was merely another interesting piece of cultural information. Orbital bombardment. How wonderfully thorough. Though I suspect you might find the results somewhat disappointing in my particular case. However, I confess myself curious about your examination procedures. Very well, Inquisitor. I accept your invitation, though I reserve the right to leave if your hospitality proves lacking. The casual acceptance of Imperial authority, delivered with the tone of someone granting a favor rather than submitting to superior force, unsettled even Mordian's iron composure. In his experience, entities powerful enough to survive orbital bombardment typically didn't submit to custody voluntarily. The fact that this creature seemed genuinely curious about Imperial procedures suggested either supreme confidence or complete ignorance of what such examination might entail. The Inquisitor activated his vox, speaking in code frequencies that bypassed standard Imperial channels. Control, this is Mordian. The anomaly has agreed to accompany me for examination. Prepare Facility Omega for a class apocalypse subject. Full containment protocols, maximum security rating. As the Imperial forces organized for transport, Alucard gazed up at the smog-choked sky with something approaching melancholy. Somewhere beyond those polluted clouds lay stars he had never seen, worlds that had never known the touch of moonlight or the whisper of autumn wind through ancient forests. This reality operated according to rules that made his own dark world seem almost pastoral by comparison. Yet beneath the industrial decay and military oppression, he sensed something familiar. The same desperate struggle between light and darkness that had defined his own existence for centuries. The same thin line between civilization and chaos that required constant vigilance to maintain. Perhaps this grim future wasn't so different from his own time after all. Perhaps he had found a place where his particular talents might finally serve a worthy purpose. The thought brought his unsettling smile back in full force, causing several nearby guardsmen to unconsciously step backward. In the crimson emergency lighting, his expression held promises of violence and revelation in equal measure. Whatever these Imperials had planned for their examination, Alucard suspected they were about to discover that some subjects examined back. The Valkyrie's interior hummed with the distinctive resonance of Imperial grav engines as it lifted from the plaza, carrying its unprecedented cargo toward the orbital facility known only as Omega. Alucard sat with perfect stillness in the restraint harness designed for Space Marine passengers, his crimson eyes taking in every detail of the aircraft's construction. The fusion of advanced technology with Gothic ornamentation fascinated him, speaking to a civilization that had elevated warfare to the level of religious art. Inquisitor Mordian occupied the seat directly across from him, Stormbolter within easy reach despite the cramped confines. His retinue of acolytes maintained vigilant positions throughout the passenger compartment, their weapons trained on the anomalous figure with professional precision. Yet Alucard sensed their underlying unease, the way their enhanced senses recoiled from his presence, like animals detecting a predator beyond their understanding. The Vampire Lord's attention shifted to the viewing port as they ascended through the planet's industrial atmosphere. Metallica Tertius revealed its true scope as they climbed, a world-spanning complex of manufactorums and mining operations that had consumed every trace of natural beauty over millennia of exploitation. Hive cities rose like metal mountains from seas of toxic waste, their spires reaching toward a sky choked with the byproducts of endless production. Remarkable, your species has transformed an entire world into a single machine dedicated to the production of death. It's simultaneously horrifying and magnificent in scope. Mordian's psychic hood flickered with warning runes as he monitored the entity for signs of warp corruption or mental influence. The creature's casual observations carried disturbing implications about its origins and capabilities. No ordinary being could perceive the full scope of a Forge world's operations so quickly or accurately. The Imperium of Man spans 1,000,000 worlds, each contributing to humanity's survival according to its capabilities. Metallica Tertius produces the weapons and armor that protect countless billions from the darkness beyond the Emperor's light. Darkness beyond the Emperor's light. Alucard repeated the phrase with evident relish. Tell me, Inquisitor, in your experience, does this darkness ever originate from within the light itself? The question bordered on heresy, yet something in the entity's tone suggested genuine philosophical inquiry rather than corrupted mockery. Mordian had spent decades studying the myriad ways chaos infiltrated Imperial society, and he recognized the subtle difference between malicious subversion and uncomfortable truth-seeking. The Emperor protects humanity from external threats and internal weakness alike. Those who serve faithfully need not fear the darkness within themselves. How wonderfully circular. Alucard's smile held no warmth as he regarded the Inquisitor's carefully neutral expression. In my experience, those who claim immunity to internal darkness are typically the most susceptible to it. But perhaps your Emperor's protection operates according to different principles than the natural laws I'm familiar with. The Valkyrie shuddered slightly as it passed through the upper atmosphere, transitioning from planetary airspace to the void beyond. Through the viewing ports, the cold stars of an alien galaxy became visible, their light filtered through the defensive screens that protected the orbital facility. Alucard studied the constellation patterns with growing fascination, recognizing none of the stellar formations that had guided his steps through centuries of earthbound existence. Facility Omega materialized from the darkness ahead, a massive construct of adamantium and ceramite that dwarfed the largest cathedral ships Alucard had witnessed during his brief time on the surface. Its angular surfaces bristled with weapon systems and sensor arrays, while docking bays large enough to accommodate entire fleets gaped like mechanical mouths in its armored hull. Your architecture continues to impress. This facility could house a small city, yet it's dedicated entirely to the examination and containment of single individuals. Either your enemies possess capabilities that justify such precautions, or your civilization has elevated paranoia to an art form. Both assessments contain elements of truth. Mordian's response carried the weight of hard-earned experience. The threats we face require measures that might seem excessive to those unfamiliar with the realities of the 41st millennium. The docking procedure proceeded with mechanical precision, automated systems guiding their craft into a bay designed for maximum security rather than convenience. As the Valkyrie settled onto the landing platform, Alucard noted the positioning of automated weapon systems and the thickness of the blast doors that sealed them within the facility's armored embrace. When the passenger ramp lowered, a reception committee awaited them that spoke to the unprecedented nature of their cargo. Tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus stood alongside inquisitorial acolytes, their augmented forms creating a fusion of flesh and machinery that would have seemed nightmarish in any other context. At their center stood a figure whose very presence caused the air to shimmer with psychic energy. The Primaris Psyker wore robes of deep purple marked with silver wards against mental intrusion, her hood drawn back to reveal eyes that glowed with barely contained warp fire. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that existed partially outside normal auditory spectra. Inquisitor Mordian, I have prepared the examination chambers according to your specifications. However, I must report an anomaly in the facility's psychic resonance since this entity's approach began. The immaterium itself seems to recoil from its presence. Alucard descended the ramp with fluid grace, his boots touching the deck plates without producing the metallic ring that should have accompanied such contact. His gaze swept over the assembled reception committee with polite interest, lingering momentarily on the Primaris Psyker's glowing eyes. How fascinating. A human who has learned to channel energies from dimensions beyond normal space-time, though I notice you maintain careful barriers between yourself and those forces. Wise, considering what typically happens to mortals who open themselves completely to such influences. The Psyker's expression tightened as she felt the entity's attention focus upon her. Her psychic senses, honed through decades of training and enhancement, detected no trace of the creature in the warp's reflection of reality. It existed as a null space, a void that somehow possessed consciousness and mobility. You are not reflected in the immaterium. Such a condition should render consciousness impossible, yet you clearly possess awareness and intelligence. How do you exist? An excellent question. Alucard's tone carried genuine appreciation for her perceptiveness. In my own reality, I existed as what might be termed a localized violation of natural law. Death claimed me centuries ago, yet I continue through means that transcend conventional understanding. Perhaps your immaterium simply lacks the conceptual framework necessary to accommodate my particular form of existence. The procession through Facility Omega's corridors revealed the true scope of Imperial containment protocols. Cells designed to hold daemon princes stood alongside chambers equipped to neutralize psychic phenomena beyond human comprehension. Each sealed door bore warnings in High Gothic that spoke of horrors contained within, entities so dangerous that even acknowledging their existence required the highest security clearances. Tech Dominus Varec 77 emerged from one of the side passages, his mechanical form clicking and whirring as numerous augmentic devices focused on their unusual prisoner. His vox grill crackled with binary cant as he communicated with his fellow tech priests before switching to Gothic for the benefit of the inquisitorial personnel. Lord Inquisitor, initial scans confirm the entity's anomalous nature. It registers no electromagnetic signature, no thermal output, no biological processes consistent with known life forms. Yet it clearly possesses mass and interacts with gravitational fields in a manner suggesting complex internal structure. Alucard paused in his examination of a particularly elaborate containment door to address the Tech Dominus directly. Your augmentations are impressive, though I confess curiosity about the philosophical implications. At what point does the replacement of flesh with machinery alter the fundamental nature of consciousness itself? The question struck at the heart of Mechanicus doctrine, challenging assumptions that had guided the tech priests for millennia. Varec 77's optical mechadendrites adjusted as he processed the implications of the inquiry. The Omnissiah teaches that flesh is weak, but the machine is eternal. Consciousness exists independent of its substrate, whether biological or mechanical. We seek perfection through the marriage of flesh and steel. Perfection through transformation. Alucard nodded thoughtfully. In my own experience, the pursuit of transcendence often leads to discoveries about the nature of existence that the transcendent individual never anticipated. I wonder if your Omnissiah prepared you for all the implications of your chosen path. The examination chamber they finally reached represented the pinnacle of Imperial containment technology. Force fields powerful enough to restrain greater daemons hummed with barely contained energy, while psychic dampeners created zones of null space that would prevent even the most potent mental influences from manifesting. At the chamber's center stood a restraint chair that could accommodate beings of superhuman size and strength. Alucard studied the apparatus with professional interest, his gaze taking in every detail of its construction and operation. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of genuine admiration. Elegant in its thoroughness, though I suspect you've never encountered a subject quite like me before. Your psychic dampeners are designed to interfere with immaterial influences, but I exist through purely material means, albeit material that operates according to principles your science hasn't yet codified. The restraint chair adjusted automatically as he approached, its sensors attempting to gauge his physical parameters. When the readings proved inconsistent with any known biological or mechanical template, warning runes began flashing across the monitoring displays. Inquisitor Mordian took his position at the chamber's control console, his fingers dancing across activation runes with practiced efficiency. As the examination protocols initialized, he addressed his subject with the formal authority of Imperial law. By the power invested in me by the Golden Throne of Terror, I command you to submit to complete examination. Your cooperation will be noted in the final assessment of your threat classification. Alucard settled into the restraint chair with casual elegance, allowing the mechanical restraints to secure his limbs without resistance. His expression remained one of polite curiosity as energy fields activated around him and sensor arrays began their detailed scans. I confess myself eager to learn what your instruments will make of me. In my own time, the limits of scientific understanding were far more restrictive. Your civilization's approach to the unknown appears refreshingly systematic. The first wave of scans produced results that defied interpretation. Medical cogitators designed to analyze the most exotic alien physiologies returned error codes when confronted with Alucard's internal structure. His cellular matrix appeared to exist in a state of controlled decay, yet maintained perfect functionality through mechanisms that violated fundamental biological principles. Tech Dominus Varec 77's Vox Grill emitted a burst of agitated binary as he processed the incoming data. His mechanical limbs moved frantically across control interfaces as he attempted to refine the scanning parameters. Lord Inquisitor, the subject's biological composition defies classification. Individual cells appear to be in various states of death and regeneration simultaneously. The process should be impossible according to known biological laws, yet the readings are consistent across all scanning frequencies. Alucard's voice carried amusement despite the restraints that held him immobile. Death and regeneration in eternal balance. Yes, that would be an accurate description of my current state, though I suspect your instruments lack the conceptual framework to appreciate the elegance of the solution. The Primaris Psyker approached the containment field, her glowing eyes fixed on the anomalous figure within. Her psychic senses, enhanced beyond human norms, detected something that her instruments could not quantify. The entity's consciousness existed on multiple levels simultaneously, accessing memories and experiences that spanned centuries of existence. Your mind contains layers of memory that extend far beyond any human lifespan. I perceive fragments of civilizations that predate the Imperium, technologies and societies that no longer exist. How is such preservation of knowledge possible? Memory is the one treasure that death cannot claim completely. Alucard's response carried weight that spoke of experiences beyond mortal comprehension. When one exists as I do, the past becomes as real as the present. Every moment, every encounter, every drop of blood spilled becomes part of an eternal tapestry that defines existence itself. The examination continued for hours, each new scan revealing additional impossibilities. Alucard's blood, when finally sampled through specialized extraction devices, proved to be simultaneously his own and that of countless others. Genetic markers from hundreds of different individuals existed in perfect harmony within his system, creating a biological collective that should have resulted in immediate cellular breakdown. Most disturbing of all, the blood samples showed signs of awareness even when separated from the main body. Under microscopic examination, individual cells displayed purposeful movement and coordination that suggested distributed consciousness across his entire biological matrix. Inquisitor Mordian studied the accumulating data with growing unease. His decades of experience with the Imperium's most classified threats had not prepared him for an entity that operated according to entirely unknown principles. The creature was clearly non-human, yet displayed none of the characteristics associated with known xenos species or chaos-spawned abominations. Your nature appears to be unique within Imperial records. You claim to be a vampire from another reality, yet you demonstrate capabilities that exceed our understanding of such entities. What powers do you possess that have not yet been revealed? Alucard's smile widened within the containment field, his expression holding promises of revelations yet to come. Power is such a limited concept, Inquisitor. What you perceive as supernatural abilities are simply the natural result of existing outside conventional constraints. Death, time, physical law, TT1, these become negotiable when one learns to exist in the spaces between absolute states. The restraint chair's sensors detected a subtle shift in the prisoner's molecular density, as if his very substance was becoming less fixed in its current configuration. Warning klaxons began sounding throughout the examination chamber as the containment protocols registered readings that exceeded their operational parameters. The entity is beginning to demonstrate phase variance characteristics. Tech Dominus Varric 77's mechanical voice carried urgent undertones as his instruments detected the anomaly. Recommend immediate activation of emergency containment procedures before subject achieves dimensional displacement capability. Before Mordian could respond, the lights throughout Facility Omega flickered and died. Emergency illumination cast everything in the familiar crimson glow that had marked Alucard's first appearance on Metallica Tertius. In that blood-colored light, his form seemed to waver and shift, shadows gathering around him like living servants eager to fulfill their master's will. When he spoke again, his voice carried new harmonics that seemed to resonate through the facility's very structure. Gentlemen, I believe it's time you learned what examination truly means when applied to someone with my particular qualifications. The restraints designed to hold daemon princes began to crack under stresses they were never designed to withstand, yet Alucard made no obvious effort to break free. Instead, he simply existed more intensely, his presence expanding beyond the physical boundaries of the containment chamber. Every human in the facility felt the weight of his attention settle upon them like a predator selecting its next meal. In the observation galleries above the examination chamber, automated defense systems activated in response to the containment breach. Gun servitors swiveled toward the anomalous readings, while blast doors began sealing throughout the facility. Yet something in the way shadows moved suggested that such precautions might prove inadequate against what was awakening in their midst. Alucard's examination of Imperial containment protocols was about to become a demonstration of why some subjects should never be underestimated. The No-Life King had submitted to their procedures out of curiosity, but that curiosity was now thoroughly satisfied. What remained was the question of what lessons he would choose to teach his captors about the true nature of power in a universe where death itself had become negotiable. The containment field collapsed with a sound like reality tearing along invisible seams. Where moments before sophisticated Imperial technology had held one of the most dangerous entities ever encountered, now only empty air remained. The restraint chair sat vacant, its adamantium bonds severed, not by force, but by something far more unsettling. They had simply ceased to recognize their prisoner as something that could be contained. Alucard materialized behind the observation console where Inquisitor Mordian stood, his movement defying every law of physics the Mechanicus held sacred. No teleportation signature registered on their instruments. No warp disturbance rippled through the immaterium. He had simply stepped from one location to another, as if the intervening space was merely a suggestion rather than an absolute barrier. The Inquisitor spun, Stormbolter clearing its holster with practiced speed, but found his target studying the examination data with polite interest. Alucard's finger traced across the hololithic displays, showing his own biological impossibilities, his expression that of a scholar reviewing particularly fascinating research. Crude but effective methodology. though I notice your instruments struggle with concepts that exist outside their programmed parameters. Tell me, Inquisitor, what do your protocols recommend when the subject refuses to conform to Imperial classifications? Mordian's enhanced reflexes kept his weapon trained on the entity despite the futility such an action likely represented. His psychic hood blazed with warning runes as proximity alarms screamed throughout the facility. Every scanner and auspex within 100 meters registered contradictory readings that threatened to overload their machine spirits. Subjects that cannot be classified are designated apex threat and scheduled for immediate termination through maximum force application. The facility's self-destruct system can reduce this entire station to component atoms within 30 seconds. How wonderfully direct. Alucard turned from the displays to face the Inquisitor, his movement fluid as liquid shadow. Though I suspect you'll find atomic dissolution somewhat less permanent than your experience suggests. Death, you see, becomes rather flexible when one has spent sufficient time exploring its boundaries. The Tech Dominus approached with mechanical precision, his augmented form bristling with scanning devices and analysis protocols. Binary cant streamed from his Vox grill as he attempted to process readings that defied every principle of the Omnissiah's teachings. When he finally spoke in Gothic, his voice carried overtones of genuine confusion. Entity demonstrates localized reality alteration without corresponding warp manifestation. Probability matrices suggest technological principles beyond current Imperial understanding. Recommend immediate data preservation before termination protocols activate. Alucard regarded the tech priest with something approaching approval. At least someone appreciates the scientific value of unprecedented phenomena. Your augmentations are fascinating, Dominus. The marriage of flesh and machine taken to its logical extreme, though I wonder if you've considered the implications of consciousness distributed across both biological and mechanical substrates. Before Varix 7-7 could formulate a response, the Primaris Psyker stepped forward, her eyes blazing with warp fire as she attempted to penetrate the entity's mental defenses. Her psychic probe, capable of shattering the minds of greater daemons, encountered something that made her enhanced consciousness recoil in instinctive terror. What she found wasn't the expected chaos, corruption, or alien intelligence. Instead, her probe touched the edge of something vast and ancient, a consciousness that contained the accumulated experiences of centuries lived in the spaces between life and death. The sheer weight of that existence, compressed into a single awareness, threatened to overwhelm her enhanced psyche. "Your mind contains multitudes," she whispered, blood beginning to leak from her glowing eyes. "How many souls have you consumed to achieve such cognitive density?" "Consumed?" Alucard's laugh carried harmonics that resonated through the facility's structure, causing sensitive equipment to flicker and fail. "Oh, my dear Psyker, you misunderstand the relationship entirely. I don't consume souls. I preserve them. Every life I've taken, every drop of blood that has sustained my existence, becomes part of an eternal collective. They live on within me, their memories and experiences adding to the tapestry of my consciousness." The implications of this revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled Imperial personnel. In their experience, entities that preserved consumed souls were typically greater daemons of the ruinous powers, beings whose very existence threatened the stability of reality itself. Yet this creature displayed none of the expected corruption or warp taint associated with such abominations. Mordian's finger tightened on his Stormbolter's trigger, but before he could fire, Alucard raised a single finger in a gesture of polite restraint. The weapon's machine spirit suddenly went silent, its targeting systems unable to maintain lock on a target that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Now, Inquisitor, let's not resort to violence until we've exhausted the possibilities for civilized discourse. I find myself genuinely curious about your Imperium's relationship with death and preservation. Your servitors, for instance, lobotomized humans turned into biological machinery. Your cherubs, infant corpses, animated through sacred rituals. Even your Emperor himself, from what I understand, exists in a state between life and death upon his golden throne. The casual mention of the God Emperor sent ripples of shock through the chamber. Such direct reference to the master of mankind's condition bordered on heresy of the highest order. Yet the entity's tone suggested academic observation rather than blasphemous mockery. "You speak of matters beyond your understanding, creature. The Emperor's sacrifice sustains humanity across 1,000,000 worlds. His suffering is the price of our species' survival against the darkness that would consume us all. Suffering as the foundation of salvation." Alucard nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I'm familiar with that particular theology. Though in my experience, entities that require constant sacrifice to maintain their power tend to develop rather specific appetites over time. Tell me, what does your Emperor consume to sustain his existence? And what does that consumption cost those who serve him?" The question cut to the heart of Imperial doctrine in ways that made even Mordian's iron faith waver slightly. The daily sacrifice of 1,000 psykers to maintain the Astronomicon was one of the Imperium's most closely guarded secrets, known only to the highest echelons of Imperial authority. How could this creature possess such knowledge? Your information sources are disturbingly accurate. How do you know of matters that are classified beyond the highest security levels? Knowledge has a way of revealing itself to those who exist outside conventional temporal boundaries. Alucard moved to examine one of the facility's blast doors, his fingers tracing the Gothic inscriptions with evident appreciation. When one has walked through centuries of human history, patterns begin to emerge. Empires rise and fall, but the underlying structures of power remain remarkably consistent. The vampire lord paused, his head tilting as if listening to sounds beyond normal human perception. His expression shifted, becoming predatory in a way that made every weapon in the chamber seem suddenly inadequate. "Speaking of patterns, it appears we're about to receive visitors. Your facility's perimeter defenses have detected multiple contacts, approaching at velocities that suggest advanced propulsion systems. The energy signatures match those of your earlier description, is expiration, the Kryptonian Collectorate, I believe you called them." Alarms began blaring throughout Facility Omega, as external sensors confirmed the entity's impossible knowledge. Long-range Auspex arrays detected a fleet of vessels translating from some form of dimensional transit at the system's edge. Their configuration matched no known Imperial or Xenos design, yet their approach vector indicated hostile intent. In the facility's command center, astropaths screamed as psychic echoes of the approaching fleet's nature reached their enhanced senses. These weren't ships in any conventional sense, but living constructs that married organic and mechanical components in ways that defied Imperial understanding. At their core, each vessel pulsed with energies that registered as neither warp-based nor purely technological. Alucard's smile widened as he observed the growing panic among the Imperial personnel. "It seems my presence here has attracted attention from interested parties. The Collectorate's pursuit methods are remarkably efficient, though I confess surprise at their ability to track dimensional displacement across realities." Fleet Admiral Thorne's voice crackled through the facility's Vox network, his words carrying the authority of decades spent commanding Imperial void forces. "All stations, this is Fleet Command. Unknown vessels have entered the system and are ignoring all hail attempts. Configuration suggests advanced Xenos technology of unprecedented sophistication. Recommend immediate evacuation of Facility Omega and activation of planetary defense protocols." Before Mordian could respond to the fleet warning, the facility shuddered as something massive impacted its outer hull. The strike wasn't kinetic in nature. No projectile or energy beam had registered on their sensors. Instead, something had simply appeared against their armored surface and begun cutting through adamantium plating with impossible efficiency. "Breach in Section Gamma 7. Emergency bulkheads sealing automatically," the facility's servitor voice announced with mechanical calm. "Unknown entities detected within compromised areas. Initiating security protocols." Alucard straightened, his casual demeanor shifting to something more focused and dangerous. His coat billowed despite the absence of any air current, and shadows began gathering around him like living things responding to their master's call. "Ah, they've decided on direct intervention rather than negotiation. How predictably efficient. Though I suspect they'll find this particular collection considerably more challenging than their previous acquisitions." The examination chamber's blast doors, designed to withstand orbital bombardment, began to buckle inward under forces that registered no energy signature on Imperial sensors. Whatever was attempting entry possessed strength that exceeded even Space Marine capabilities, yet moved with precision that suggested intelligence rather than brute force. Inquisitor Mordian activated his Vox, broadcasting on emergency frequencies that would reach every Imperial asset in the system. "This is Inquisitor Mordian aboard Facility Omega. We are under attack by unknown xenos forces possessing advanced technology and hostile intent. The facility houses a Class Apex threat that must not fall into enemy hands. Recommend immediate activation of Exterminatus protocols if our position is compromised." The suggestion of planetary annihilation to prevent enemy acquisition was met with static-filled silence as fleet commanders processed the implications. Exterminatus was the Imperium's ultimate sanction, reserved for threats that exceeded all other response capabilities. The fact that an Inquisitor was requesting such measures spoke to the unprecedented nature of their situation. Alucard observed the growing desperation among his captors with something approaching sympathy. "Your protocols are admirably thorough, though I suspect orbital bombardment will prove as ineffective against the Collectorate as it would against me. They've had millennia to perfect their defensive technologies, and their understanding of dimensional manipulation exceeds anything your Imperium has encountered." The blast doors finally gave way, revealing a corridor filled with figures that challenged every assumption about the nature of existence itself. The beings that entered appeared humanoid at first glance, but closer examination revealed the same unsettling perfection that marked Alucard's own features. These were Kryptonians, but transformed through technologies that had married organic evolution with mechanical enhancement across countless generations. As the dimensional barriers collapsed and realities bled into one another, the grim darkness of the 41st millennium found itself host to forces that transcended its carefully ordered understanding of existence. Alucard stood between two civilizations that had forgotten the meaning of restraint, watching as the Imperium's absolute authority met the Collectorate's perfect efficiency in a collision that would reshape the very foundations of what humanity could become. In that moment of convergence, as ancient vampiric power faced the technological apotheosis of a dead world's children, the question wasn't whether the galaxy would survive their meeting. The question was what new form of existence would emerge from the ashes of old certainties, and whether anything recognizable as human would remain when the darkness finally settled.